Hey, welcome back. I'm Hunter. This is Zach.
And this is our best guess.
Last time we talked about our personal philosophies, and this time we're going to dive into a individual philosophy, like philosophical ideals on an individual basis.
A little bit of where our philosophies come from, like the philosophers that inspire us to sort of form our own philosophies.
And to start off with, we're going to start with an idea, the religious relation of philosophy, and, well, the relationship between philosophy and religion. Please excuse me.
Right. So I personally view religion and philosophy more together, like I conflate the two, and Hunter views them as separate.
Right. I view religion as a more moral code, and he views religion as a guide to philosophy. Is that correct?
No, I view philosophy. I feel like religion is more giving philosophy a responsibility.
Religion is giving responsibility to philosophy?
Yes.
That's an interesting one. So you believe that philosophy comes from religion then?
Yes.
Okay.
A little bit, yes. Because when you look at philosophy, that's more of a personal way of just kind of looking at reality and thinking about it in a very specific way. Either how you deal with it, how other people deal with it, and like you see that with like Stoicism or different things. One of the things that we have in common is nihilism.
Right.
But because there are so many different ways of looking at it, also like hedonism, it doesn't really give an impetus on which one you should choose. At that point, it's more so just like shopping around for like, which one is me? Which one do I more align with? But with religion, it gives an importance on how you should behave, and I think that's a like pretty big part of philosophy.
I mean, I would argue that that is a moral separation, is it not? If religion gives you the idea of how you should behave and philosophy gives you the idea of how you should think about life, wouldn't those two things be separate in their own inherent nature?
They are a little bit separate, but
I should add, before we continue on, that I don't view them as totally separate. I understand that there is an overlap, but I view them as separate addressable subjects, if that makes more sense.
they are different. Like they're definitely separate, and there is religion, which looks more at like, especially now, it's become a lot more just looking at the afterlife and like believing in a bunch of different things. But what I think it should be more is that moral viewpoint of right and wrong, of what makes something right versus what makes something wrong, and then that's more. So I guess what we can start off with is just baseline reality. There is the reality that both me and you inhabit, and there's not really any one thing that's really that's really the only thing that's like true, is that we live in a reality.
I mean, I guess to counter that argument, there are plenty of philosophies that argue against reality in general, including nihilism, as
Right.
we have found out. Just as a side note, we did look up some of these things just to make sure that we knew more or less what the general definition was. And most of it we were correct on. However, there was a small bit on nihilism that surprised me, at least. Which was that nihilism can go to the extent of not even believing that existence is real, and thus nothing matters. But probably more on that here in a minute here. My contention with your statement is that a lot of philosophy itself argues against reality, and I don't think that religion does that very often.
Well, so this is what religion does, is because philosophy a lot of the times can argue that reality isn't real. Like I said, that devolves it of responsibility. So if nothing is real and the only like quote unquote real thing is our experience of reality, then like I said, there's no responsibility to behave in any specific way. But then religion adds that responsibility on, well, let's say there is a reality. how should you act if someone else exists within that reality? Because if you're arguing that reality doesn't exist, that is an argument that your experience is it. Like, that's it. There is no other experience besides your own. Which, like, I mean, there are certain philosophies that...
I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say, I'm going to argue that there is a reality, an absolute reality, just for the sake of arguing overall about this. I would take, if I believed that there was an absolute reality, and this is it, that the other philosophies that say reality isn't real are bogus. So obviously I'm shunning them. And then I turn to religion and philosophy, and I look at them equally, and I say, okay, so religion is based in my own reality, and philosophy is based in my outlook on that reality. So why do you believe that religion focuses into philosophy and not philosophy is the outward expression of how you view the world? So wouldn't religion dictate, don't murder people, and philosophy dictate, I want to not murder people?
The thing that puts...
Sorry, I didn't mean to make it so long.
Yeah, no worries. No.
Okay.
The thing that puts philosophy first is the religion adds consequence to certain philosophies. So you can have whatever philosophy you want, but the issue is carrying out certain philosophical principles leads to certain consequences. So personally, I would consider myself more of a Nietzschean nihilist. So I do accept the fact that we, as we are in reality, are in a reality. Like, there's not really much outside of it that we can tell. It's just kind of here.
Right.
And within that, that's where the Nietzschean part comes in, is because there is no inherent meaning in just existing within this place, we have to take it onto ourselves to put in the action to sort of make it meaningful. So maybe meaning is a good spot to like zone in on, because with religion, it is meaning for a higher cause, for a higher purpose, so to speak, like transcendence. It's that metaphysical aspect of...
Okay, I could argue that. I could agree with that idea that the religion focuses in on meaning itself, creating meaning almost. But I would also say that shouldn't meaning be created by the individual instead of having a prescribed meaning? Because that's what it sounds like to me, is that you're prescribing meaning.
Well, right. So then, yes, the meaning can be sort of prescribed by the individual, but when you give all the power to the individual rather than having other individuals within that meaning, I think meaning is a lot better in context of other people's meanings. And that's because...
Ooh, I wildly disagree with that.
Well, and that's...
So you're arguing effectively that meaning has no meaning unless there are other people to give it, a definition or to give it a context in which to survive. And I could understand that.
Right.
I mean, we could argue that if you were the only person in the world, there really wouldn't be any meaning overall to your life.
Right.
I get that argument, and if that's the extreme you're going to, yeah, we can agree on that. But to have individual meaning doesn't necessarily hinge upon having meaning from other people. Sometimes you don't understand other people's point of view. You don't understand their philosophy, their religion, their worldview, and that doesn't give yours any less context. It just means that they exist, and that's good enough.
Right, but then that brings back the responsibility, because there is certain individual meanings that are harmful to the overall, like the collective of meanings, like the multiple other. It
That's
more
an
so
interesting concept, the collective of meanings. So you're basically saying humanity, but as an individual.
As in everyone has their own meanings, right?
Okay.
And there are certain meanings that when gotten rid of that responsibility to take other meanings into account, they sort of are tyrannical and trample on other people, which.
But is that inherently bad for that network of meaning, if you will? Because that, again, in your context, gives meaning to other people. That's the hero archetype.
Right.
The tyrannical person pushes down all the other people who are just not willful enough to stand against him. And, the hero rises. He changes the dynamic of that atmosphere. So does it make them less meaningful by nature, or does it make them just as meaningful because the multitude
I feel
exists?
like it actually makes them more meaningful, but with a lot of issue that I have with people is they don't take that responsibility, because so the person who's ultimately taking their meaning to the point where it starts to tyrannize on other people, they're sort of taking their meaning to its fullest, to its most logical conclusion, and if it does impede on other people, to them, of course, right, and that's why that is a responsibility to know where your philosophy impedes on other people, or where you're not taking the responsibility far enough. Because if everyone were to take that responsibility to its logical conclusion, similar to that person who maybe starts to, like you said, maybe a villain archetype starts to trample on other people, if everyone was more of that hero archetype of, instead of trampling, it's empowering everyone else to be a more real, or most accurate meaning to them.
So if everyone was to take their philosophy to its, logical conclusion, or at least as far as they can go.
Right.
I guess my question, because I'm a little confused, you mean that they would be more heroic or villainous, or that there would be more heroic and villainous people?
I feel like...
Or am I missing the...
No.
Because, okay, so let me give an argument here. So religion, as relating to philosophy, if you are talking about, let's just say, pursuing, we'll call it the individual path of each person, their path as far as they can go, or are meant to go, to its logical conclusion. Whether that's tied into religion or not, seems to me that you would, relative to your view on both, how much of a percent each one affects you, be more moral or less moral. And this is, again, we're talking in a perfect perspective, where religion, at least my argument is talking about religion gives morals, philosophy gives perspective. So there are obviously immoral people out there who are fully religious, and people who have great philosophies that don't follow them, things like that. But overall, what I'm talking about is, if you were to follow the perfect religious and perfect philosophical path in your own right, depending on how much you relied on those things to express yourself, to follow your path, wouldn't that make those people, under the tyrannical rule, the squished people, just as important as the hero figure? Because those squished people, being more and more and more than the hero figure, be just as, if not more important, because a hero figure one-on-one is just a duel between fates, if you will.
So that's where I brought up in the last podcast about religion kind of similar to what you're doing with the archetypes right now, with the villain and the hero. They kind of get rid of that responsibility by saying, I don't have any control over this reality. It's all in God's hands, so therefore it's not my responsibility. But if you were to take more of a Nietzschean nihilist perspective on it, you would get rid of the villain and the hero archetype and look at more of, if the person who is impeding on other people, if the other people were to be as take their philosophies and meaning to their logical conclusion and maybe stand up against that tyranny, it would be a lot. It would allow all of them to grow. I guess if it's kind of like that whole if we're all
superheroes
superheroes
than
no one is. Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of that same argument.
Okay, I can understand that.
Because at that point, if someone's impeding on you, you either stop them or
you accept
it.
Right. You take it to the face. Okay, I can understand that. I guess we should move into a more the nihilism specifically, because it is a subject that you and I share differently, but we do share that there is a. Let's start with the definition.
Okay.
So nihilism is the belief that, simplified, nothing really matters.
Yeah.
Not to say that nothing has meaning, but at the end of to me, I guess I'm projecting already. So.
I think like the basis of it is, like you said, there is no meaning. It is
right.
Like,
I guess that's a better way to say it.
It is, we live in a random universe that just exists, and we're just specks of meat floating through space infinitely, with no purpose, no meaning, and it's very, very it's materialistic in the most extreme sense.
Ooh, materialistic in the most extreme sense.
Or not material. Yeah, I guess.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that statement, and I haven't formulated why at the moment. It struck me as wrong, but I think the issue that I have with that statement specifically is that materialism is more associated with externalism, like gathering things that are valuable.
Right. I did kind of use materialism as.
I mean, you could arguably.
I meant more. It's
like very singularly corporeal. Like we exist in this existence, and there is nothing else. There is no meaning. There's no guiding hand. There's no
right. We just exist.
Right. It's an accident. It's entropy.
Right. It's an accident. That's exact. That's what's the one philosophy say? Like it's a tale told, or the I think it's a play. Life is a tale written by an idiot, or
I actually don't know that.
Sorry, I'm trying to think of it. Life is a cruel joke told by an idiot or something.
That sounds really familiar to me, but
yeah,
I don't remember. I couldn't name what it's from.
I don't remember what it is, but signifying nothing. Like that was the end of the quote is.
Now my argument on nihilism is that despite there being no inherent meaning, is that we can actually create meaning of our own.
Right.
And this ties a little bit back into the religious philosophy thing, is that you can choose religion, you can choose a philosophy, you can choose neither. You can, wing it as much as you want. I would hesitate to say that you would fall closer into one of the other categories than you would think,
Right.
Yeah, I live my life, uninfluenced by anyone as a monk. You would probably fall into one of the Eastern religions or old Catholicism.
Right.
But, I think the argument that I would like to make about nihilism specifically is that it's misunderstood as people just don't care. And I don't think that's true. I believe that caring and the inherent person-to-person social interactions can be positive and helpful, and you can have empathy and sympathy without ever branching away from nihilism. You can believe that it's all just one existence, so this is it, and still have those emotional attachments.
Right. And
meaning.
Right. And like kind of when we were looking up nihilism earlier, there was a question that said, "Can nihilists love?" And that we thought that was kind of a dumb question, because that's not really what nihilists believe. They more so believe that like love is less of a real thing, and it's more of just a chemical reaction in your brain that causes you to want to
magic,
reproduce. Right.
Which is I feel like love is more associated with magic quite often, and
right.
I understand the notion, and believe me, I do understand the notion. I dream of that notion as well. I think everybody has that fantasy.
Right.
But the fantastical and the reality have to be separated at some point. Yeah, it can feel magical to you. You can meet the one person you'll be happy with for the rest of your life. But my nihilism comes in and says, there might be more than one of those people.
Right, and that's where a lot of that. So that's where my sort of religion and the clash with religion and philosophy come in. Is yes. So no matter what, love at the very bottom is that chemical reaction, and like you said, there might be multiple people that you feel that chemical reaction with, but if you were to just chase that in the more like hedonistic sense of just trying to fulfill that desire of
seeking
like,
greater pleasure
right,
after greater pleasure.
right, then at the end of your life it's kind of that like of course, you know, nothing has meaning, but for as much meaning as we can give it, that's a very low amount of meaning because there's not really much to pass on in the like later generations because
but is that less meaning because it's repeated, or is it less meaning simply because you found love multiple times? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's like so
think about it this way. So you fall in love for 2 years and you find somebody better, and you fall in love with them for 2 years, and you find somebody better and you fall in love with them with 2 years. And I mean, I guess this is an argument against true love, which admittedly I don't quite believe in, but
right. So
but does that make each one less meaningless?
So here's where I'll take that to the more tangible. Think about maybe a house. So let's just say that you as an individual own a house. So you buy your first house, which is just a plain house and just what you can afford at the time. And then as soon as you earn enough to earn like the next tier of house, you hop there. And maybe within a span of 10 years, you go to 10 different houses, which of course, you know, that's unrealistic.
Right, of course, but
it's just for the thought experiment. Each one of those houses are going to have very little time spent in them. There's going to be very little physical connection to it because you're not going to spend any time with planting a garden and seeing those plants grow. You're not going to have time to retile a bathroom.
I know what you're saying, but I'm equivalating you saying that about a person. Like, there's very little time spent in that person, which on like an emotional connection level I get, but on a physical level is very funny to me.
Right, and yeah, it's because it's hard to sort of tangibilize like human connection, but that is the best. So then let's say
why does it make it lesser? So what?
Well, because
well, now we're about to argue monogamy.
Well,
we're close to that.
Right, and like I am a monogamist. I
am too. Again, I buy into that whole love fantasy thing, but
right.
My realism always checks in.
Right. My realism scares me, but that's where that idea of like religious faith comes in. Is there's always going to be that separation between the nihilism and the meaninglessness to the responsibility of just trusting reality.
But your responsibility can be individualized. Actually personalized to yourself. You can say, I want to be a good person, even though this is all pointless. It doesn't mean that we all have to live like shit, or, you know, like an anarchist Mad Max society. You can personalize that without having to get rid of the nihilistic viewpoint. Like, yeah, it's all sort of meaningless. It's chaos. It's entropy. But there's no real reason that we can't live. I'm going to use the word harmoniously, but I don't mean harmoniously. I do, again, the realist in me comes out and says there will always be violence, there will always be contention. But,
well, right, and so
but
for
you
me,
can try.
Right. So for me, the way that I sort of square those two beliefs of the harmonious versus the like always chaotic is you have to take the order where you can get it, and then leave the chaos where the chaos belongs. So there are certain things that you just can't control, like when we're gonna die. That's just something you can't control. So honestly, don't think about it.
Well, to a degree, you can control one half of it.
You
can control when you die, but you can't control how long you live.
Right.
Would be my argument against that, because you know,
there's always I'll take matters in I'll take matters in my own hands, but for the other half of that, you can't control when that's going to happen, and it really is just chaotic. There's a lot that you can't control the weather. You can't control most people. You can't control most like economics and just in general like other people.
Right, we have
you.
very little, because there's so many of us, we have very little influence over the grand scheme of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the argument is that as a majority we have influence, but even that's questionable at sometimes.
Right, because there's always going to be the minority who they also have opposite viewpoints, which
I mean, they technically, according to our democratic views, shouldn't have as much or any influence really. But let's refocus real quick. I want to talk about the extreme nihilisms that sort of get put out there.
Mm-hmm.
The sim theory is one of them we talked about earlier. The other one, I believe, is that sort of the anarchist nihilism type mentality, where you just believe that nothing matters, so I can do whatever I want.
Right. That's And
I want to talk about both of them. Let's try the sim theory. Nothing really matters. Nothing is real here first.
Right. So with the sim theory, nothing really matters. What's here? The biggest part of that, I think, is again your relationship to your experience. So sort of the user, like what you personally are experiencing. And when you think about sort of like a base reality, like where that, if it does exist, like if anything exists, what would be there if not just another experience in a different way? And
so you're taking this very broad scoped. So whether this experience matters or not, it would be another experience if it didn't matter. Like you could plug out of this if you wanted to and have a different experience, and it would still be living. Is that what the argument is?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, I can understand that. My understanding of sim theory is that there is an existence we don't currently live in.
Mm-hmm.
We live in an alternate existence. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of reasons why those vary from almost person to person, from apocalyptic things to societal, progression, into the whole, virtual reality living Matrix type nonsense. And then there's, I think my favorite one was that the rapture happened and we escaped the rapture through virtual reality, so our souls became untouchable. I read that a couple of years ago, and I thought that was great. It's probably one of my favorite sim theories that exists. We escaped God's wrath because we moved into a totally new universe that we created because we became God, essentially, and then we created ourselves into a lesser than God position. I think that's kind of ironic in a weird way.
Yeah.
But I would like to talk about why do you think sim theory exists, and how close is it to religion, really?
It is a different. So yeah, I'll talk about that. It is pretty much a religion because again, that's what that's saying is. There's the philosophy of the nihilism underneath it is just that we live here, nothing matters. So when you take that to sort of a logical conclusion, because there's multiple conclusions that can be drawn.
You start with a base sentence and you kind of branch off.
Right. That one is, well, eventually what we are all chasing is just comfort and pleasure. So eventually we're going to pursue things like video games, like whatever, and then just plug in. So of course
that's virtual reality aspect.
Right, and then that's of course what happens, and then that's because then that's where the sort of religious aspect comes in, is saying, well, what's good is I don't actually know what they think we should do about the fact that, because I've heard a lot of sim theory, but then I've never heard further into. Well, then what then? What?
After we die, you mean?
No, no, but what happens after we realize that we are in a simulation? How should we act?
Collectively?
Collectively, right. Or even individually, what should you do after you realize...
Are you focusing in on the how to beat the sim idea?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And that's where the religion kind of comes into me is... So the sim theory is the philosophy, and then the religion part would come into... How
the sort of esotericism of what happens after we beat the sim, or after we die,
or
you know.
what even we should do with the sim. Like, why is the sim here?
Right.
Like,
Okay.
what
So
what's
yeah, the
what's
overall
yeah,
meaning.
right.
Okay. I totally get that. That's interesting that you bring up the beat the sim portion of that, because it's a relatively small portion of sim theory. Because a lot like flat Earth. Like, what if they discovered Earth was flat?
Yeah.
Like, what then?
Yeah.
But so I view that the same way. Is what do they think should happen? It seems very religious to me. It seems very almost spiritual in the weirdest way.
Right.
Because they talk about, like, oh, if the world collectively recognize it as a sim, it'll crash the computer. And where they came to that conclusion, how they came to that conclusion, is sort of beyond me.
Right.
But it exists, and it's one of those religious ideologies that I'm so fascinated by. And I think, religion in the same aspect is sort of cognitively across the globe. We all acknowledged death at one point. When we developed culture, when we developed burying people and paying respects to the dead, we all acknowledged death.
Right.
And we created these explanations for death and what happens after death because of fear, because of love, because of the connection we had to the living, rather than the dead.
So, okay, that's actually, it's good that you bring up death, because we could talk about more that anarchic nihilism. Is when you bring up nihilism and nothing meaning anything, it's all just floating in space. You're never going to be held accountable to your actions.
Right.
Then at that point, one of the logical conclusions you can draw there is, well, I kind of want to see what the inside of a person looks like. So I'm just going to start cutting people open.
And even if there are physical consequences, it's meaningless as long as you're willing to endure those.
Right, exactly. And a lot of that's what some people choose to believe is, like, as long as I can get away from the consequences of what the physical...
I mean, it's arguable that some people may not view the physical consequences as that bad. Like, okay, I go to jail for 20 years, but then I can do whatever I want there, like cause chaos and do...
Right.
You know,
right,
whatever.
exactly.
I know that it's a very strict place, and obviously you can't cause that much chaos. But if they don't view those consequences,
for the sake of the thought experiment, that's
right. If they don't view those consequences as extremely consequential for, you know, what's an inside of a person look like, then there are no boundaries for people like that.
Right.
And we call them psychopaths, but on another hand, they could be completely sane and following a train of thought that is
right.
that they believe to be that point, and that idealism. I guess the problem I have with it is that we call them psychopaths, and they could be following a train of thought, but that train of thought has no societal influence. That train of thought has very personalized, very singular mentality.
Right.
And I don't personally believe that nihilism is actually about the singular mentality. I know I argued earlier that, you know, meaning is assigned individually, but that meaning is also it's something that you assign individually, but it's influence, of course. And like I said, if you were the only person on Earth, it wouldn't really matter what meaning you assign to yourself. But that meaning is assigned based on influence, based on, hey, you were raised by nihilist, non-religious parents, but we taught you to treat people with respect and dignity, and, you know, always be polite and responsible and do the best you can to help people. And I think that the anarchical... I'm not sure if anarchy is the right way to do it, but I'll keep using it. Anarchical nihilism is a very invalid viewpoint of what most nihilists are. I'm sure they exist, but a lot of people think that's what nihilism is.
Well, I think that our view of religion has grown a lot more into the sort of afterlife and what your actions
we definitely as a modern culture focus more on the ethereal than like 16th century Catholicism was very strict on the how you should live, what you should do in this life to get into the afterlife. And we never really talked about that then. And now it's, you know, harps and angels and infinite cheeseburgers, whatever.
Right, exactly. And instead, what it does is, like you said, you could be raised by nihilist parents, but then be taught to behave a certain way. That you behaving that way is that religious responsibility. Because as soon as you say that, it's not necessarily religious in the sense of organized religion, but as soon as you take on the responsibility of not doing your most like hedonistic desires of maybe being an asshole to someone, like cursing someone out, or maybe not stealing, that is the action. That's you taking on that religious responsibility. And it's not...
Okay, well then it could be argued that you relatively agree with my moral assessment of religion. It imposes morality, even though you were raised to be a certain way through a philosophy. It not imposes, but I guess it guides morality.
Right.
Versus having a separate philosophy, which nihilism and let's say Christianity, Catholicism do not mix almost at all. But there is a moral takeaway from those religions and a philosophical reasoning from nihilism that you could mesh together, and I still believe that many people do.
Well, and at the end of it, like I do feel like we agree on it for the most part, because it's just more so which one we think has more control.
Yeah, that's probably it, because I view the morality aspect as much less control, or the religious aspect, excuse me. I'm mixing my own terms here. I view the religious aspect as much less control unless you ascribe to the entirety of the following.
Right.
But I mean, I like the neutral idea that you can pick and choose things from these things and create a good person within yourself.
Right.
And maybe even to buy into your idea, maybe that is I'm going to use the word holy. I rarely use this word, but a holy way to live.
And that's a lot more like, that's a very religious concept of it, but to please the more nihilists in the crowd, that's the Nietzschean way of viewing it. Is that's you making yourself more whole by realizing that there is infinite interpretations of whatever. Well, this is postmodernism. There's infinite interpretations of whatever, so therefore all and none of them are correct.
This is all. By the way, this postmodernism is basically that's post-dimensionalism, right? Where they discovered the idea or the philosophy that there may be alternate universes, multiple dimensions.
Yeah, as well as the way that we all experience things is all different. So like our green, like the color green is maybe different for me than it is for you. It's just what we have.
It's effectively analyzing the way that people analyze reality and acknowledging that it could be so different as to be unrecognizable, but we recognize it the same because we experience it the same.
Right.
It's that. I believe it's the peak after Descartes. Is that right? So Descartes made his stuff.
It is.
He made the I am me. I must
Descartes.
exist.
I think therefore I am.
And then. Oh God, what was the turning point? Postmodernism had a turning point.
Well, I feel like postmodernism came from like a lot of nihilist philosophy.
Well, I mean, to a degree, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I don't think that was the.
No, it wasn't.
I believe it was during the Enlightenment and had something to do with the perspective of actual. Human interaction with the world. Unless I'm wrong. Am I wrong?
I think the philosopher who, I think it was Foucault who.
Do we need to look this up?
I think we do need to look this up,
okay.
But
I'll look it up. Keep talking.
Well, I'll keep talking when you look that up. The Nietzschean aspect of it is that realizing that because we can't.
Okay, sorry. A late 20th century style and concept in the arts, architecture, and criticism that represents a departure from modernism, and has at its heart a general distrust of grand theories and ideologies, as well as a problematic relationship with any notion of art. That's interesting.
I think it's what it's saying is more like, so we can look at, like, I can look at the Bible and describe meaning to certain things, but another person might look at it and describe a completely different meaning from it. And therefore...
A departure from modernism. Well, let's look up modernism, obviously. there's, I feel like there's a lot of these type of definitions. A movement toward modifying traditional beliefs in accordance with modern ideas. Like, yeah, no shit. That. There we go.
I don't think so.
Nope, you're right.
That's
Well, advocates the study of no, that's not it either. Excuse us. Sorry,
I think modernism is kind of like so modernism is us taking a lot of our questions and ideas and then trying to answer them. And then postmodernism is coming in and saying you can't answer it because everything is subjective, completely subjective to the like there is no answer. And then that's where the Nietzschean note comes in and says, no, there may not be an answer, so to speak, the one big answer.
The right.
Right. But
42.
in the face of a like chaotic state of being, we can build a boat, so to speak, like we can build something to
Right, we manifest the meaning by our action.
Right, exactly. And we can
I can agree with that.
We can navigate reality in the most...
If there are better definitions for these things, we'll find out, and we'll address them later. At the moment, I think that is an agreeable way to look at modernism and postmodernism. I interpret them that way as well. There's obviously 1,000 definitions for each one of those, so we're going to have to pour through and see if those match out.
Yeah, those are big definitions, but we're starting to reach the end, I think.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to the end here. Let's address, I think the last thing we had here was the social involuntary nihilism.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
I brought this up. I wanted to talk about how little meaning that most things seem to have to most people nowadays. We've prescribed less and less meaning to our actions and less meaning to our social interactions because of not only the frequency but the
it's not really taken seriously. Like
people there's less meaning, not just because of frequency, but because there's less actual.
It's less important to people.
Yeah, less important. There's less importance placed upon those things.
That's kind of where my advocation for Nietzsche comes in, is because people have separated themselves from the responsibility of existence. It's not important. It doesn't matter if everything falls apart because, nothing matters anyway. But
I could argue, or agree with that. Yeah, no. I think that a lot of people have separated meaning, not just personal to external, but meaning overall. Even the things that they do, they don't feel a lot of meaning behind. Their jobs, even their hobbies. A lot of people do hobbies because they need something to do, not because they're passionate about it, but because they pursue.
Right.
It's the guy in high school who plays guitar because he plays guitar.
Right.
Like
I'm the dude who plays guitar.
Yeah, exactly. He's just happy to play guitar because that's something that he can do. But there's not a lot of meaning that we take away from those things, and that is sort of an involuntary nihilism. I think that a lot of people have this perception of themselves versus the world, and they really want to have an impression that they can make on the world, and so they grasp at things that they view as not necessarily meaningless, but it means something to someone else and not me. Like playing guitar. Like you choose to play guitar because other people value it, and that has value to you. Right. So it's an indirect involuntary nihilism. At least that's the way I view it. As
I view it as a lot more a lot of people really, especially when it comes to death, that's where the big crux of the issue comes in. Is
really you think death is the involuntary catalyst, if you will?
Yes, and it's because when as a society we've subscribed to nihilism and nothing matters, so what's the point of trying anyway? After that, really the only thing you can do is compete in the most materialist basic sense of, I have more stuff than you, and I may die with more stuff than you, and it may mean nothing, but hey, I had more stuff than you.
Right. It's a scoreboard.
It's a scoreboard, exactly. Point, yeah. It's a scoreboard rather than in enjoying it and really making meaning out of it, making it something more along those lines of like art. So like
Okay, so you and I have different views of art. We have for a while now.
Right.
I believe art to be the expression of like whim almost, and you believe art to be some sort of like almost a pulse on society. You tend to bring up art as a pulse check on
right
how stuff is.
and I'll bring up that house allegory again of there are certain arts that feel like on a whim, like, oh, I just did this and it's beautiful aesthetically, but it lacks like the sort of layered meaning on it. It's the layered work that goes into that, and it's a lot easier to accumulate stuff and like just buy a new house every couple years, but it's a lot
the aesthetic
right,
part.
the aesthetic part, but it's a lot harder to have a house that you like, or that like not necessarily
that even
you like
you put time into,
that you put time into, and
making
then
shelves,
right,
carving
yes, exactly. So
doorways.
that way, like every part of the house you walk through, there's a story behind it, like a meaning that to you it's layered. Versus if you just erase that every second, you don't get that layered meaning of being able to look at every little thing and see something.
I mean, I do get that feeling, and I feel like that may be a deeper part of a sense of meaning, and I understand that concept. I've never been a huge fan of art. Like I like art, don't get me wrong. I like art, and I do have aesthetics that I enjoy, and meaning that I enjoy. There are some museums and art and architecture specifically that I really enjoy. I like the meaning and the story behind them, but I don't perceive art as a societal. No, I'm. That's not right. I'm gonna make 100,000 enemies right now.
Yeah,
and
I think
my point is that I view art as important, but I don't think that many people don't think that many people pull meaning from it. I don't think that many people pull meaning from it. Death of the artist. There we go. What I'm trying to say is that art, when created, loses meaning inherently because from that point, art is only meaningful to those who take meaning from it. And
right, and
that is the basis of my nihilistic point of view.
And that's the postmodern view is once it's left the artist's creation, it's no longer in their hands of what they meant by it. It's
exactly.
And
God, I'm so glad I could figure that out, because to me, these colors on my keyboard right here are aesthetic and meaningful, and to you, they're the colors on my keyboard.
Right.
So it has meaning to both of us.
Right.
It's not the same as everyone pulling from it, and I disagree with the notion that all art has meaning. I actually disagree with the notion that all art has meaning at all, unless it is personalized, which is, thank God, what I was trying to say earlier. I was about to say, like, art has no meaning, there's no, like, societal value to it.
Right.
Not what I mean.
But I think that maybe not all art has meaning, but some of the best art is the most meaningful thing to even our existence. So when you look at like some of the most valued things that we have,
that's a material value.
Well,
I would
right,
argue that it's a material value that we've placed upon these, like the Mona Lisa. It's a material value.
Right, but
it's a great piece of art. Is it the best piece of art to ever exist? Is it even Da Vinci's best creation? No, neither of those things.
That's where that sort of nihilism comes in, is there is art that will eventually die, because as like everything, like people and ideas, like things will eventually fade into nothing, just nihilistic entropy. But that's why it's so important to, because at the time of the Mona Lisa, that was meaningful, and because it was so meaningful,
you could argue it's just as meaningful, just in an evolved way. It changed its meaning, but that doesn't make it less meaningful.
Well, right, and it could, and exactly, and okay, so I guess the best way I can describe what I'm saying is there's a quote that I heard about the Pantheon. It's like the light of Greece is dim, not so much by the lack of brightness, but in the distance of it to the past, like stars. And it's not saying that the glory of Greece isn't bright. What it's saying is it's away from us. It's like a star burning light years away.
We almost idolize it.
Right, exactly. We idolize it, but we just see it as that star. But in our own sense, we could have that star where we're at, in our area where it's allowed to be bright.
Right, so, okay, I could understand that. So, effectively, the idea of to tie it back into the involuntary nihilism is that we idolize these things that have so much meaning without ascribing personal meaning to us, but we could if we chose to.
Right, and
really, we could get rid of our nihilism, if you want to call it that, and give ourselves that meaning. We could,
right, and the Mona Lisa is a good example because a lot of people are like, "Oh, the Mona Lisa, it's the best art in the world," but then you're like, "Okay, well, what does it mean to you?" And they're like, "Oh, well, it's just the best art," and it's because in their head they have that nihilistic view of like, "Oh, art is this, therefore Mona Lisa fits this." They
weirdly have structured it instead of giving it.
Instead of and again, you're kind of right about it being on a whim, but it's also it's a whim and
what I meant by whim was whim of. I mean, I guess it is a whim in technicality of any art that is made. It's,
right.
It's a passion, but what my end goal was what I said. I think that art is only valid to the person who views it, if they view it as valid. Any wrap-up thoughts for nihilism or for the idea of religion and philosophy, actually?
Just there's I forget which philosopher it is, but I'll use Smash Mouth. Grab the tiger by the tail.
That's the kind of philosophy we really need in this modern age. Smash Mouth. You're an all-star.
Yeah, no, but there's a Smash Mouth song like grab the tiger by the tail and hold on. So that's it.
There you go. That's Zach's new nihilism. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard, please give us a subscribe. It helps. We love it. Let us know in the comments below if you want us to talk about a specific subject. We appreciate any and all feedback and all kinds of comments. We will allow all comments as long as they're not, obviously, horrible. You know, very
If they're
bad.
horrible, make sure it's towards
Make sure
Hunter.
it's pointed, at least. Come on.
Yeah.
I have plenty of things wrong with me. All right, guys. I think it's time for us to sign out.
Thanks for tuning in.
Later, guys. Bye.